Scientists need there to be a problem in order to get funding.
We have a vested interest in creating panic because then money will flow to climate science.
I don't think funding directly influences the nature of the research or the approach.
But indirectly?
Well, I can use my own organisation as an example. You're asking me a very difficult question here. Okay, my organisation has only one permanent university-funded scientist, and that's me. I have about a dozen research workers with PhDs who are working in the climatic research unit, and they're all funded on so-called soft money. Their existence requires me, or us jointly, to get external support.
So given the simplified character of the models, we'd be wise to treat their results cautiously.
They give roughly the right seasonal cycle of temperature. They show that it's warmer at the equator than it is at the poles.
But some of those things you're mentioning are pretty gross, aren't they?
Yeah, pretty gross, yes.
If the model didn't show that it was warmer at the equator and cold at the poles, there'd be something seriously the matter.
Yes. Yes, it's more important to know that a model that's used for climate studies reasonably well predicts storm tracks over the North Atlantic, or shows you that the Sahara ought to be a desert.
But showing that the Sahara is a desert is what the Met Office model has failed to do according to its published findings. If you look at its predictions of current rainfall, it shows that as much rain falls on the central Sahara in summer as Ireland and Scotland.
There's no doubt on regional scales of 2,000 kilometres or less, one cannot have a lot of confidence in the model predictions.
Others go further.
I don't believe that there is any good evidence to suggest that we should believe what they are telling us. Right now, they have been predicting that for the CO2 content rise that we've experienced over the last century or so, there should have been a couple degrees centigrade warming, but there hasn't been anything like that. There's a possibility of a half a degree centigrade warming, but that may be due to other causes, or it may not be a real warming at all. It may just be a figment of the data due to problems such as the urban heat island.
Overall, you are confident that the models give an outcome for climate change that we can rely on?
I am convinced that models are the best way of trying to determine what the outcome of increases in trace gases are.
That's a different answer.
That is a different answer, yeah.
The question is, can we at the moment believe in the predictions they're making with any confidence?
Right, can you just be a bit more specific about, you say, predictions?
The most obvious one, the prediction of the effects of carbon dioxide on temperature.
It's difficult for me to, I'm not sure how one can quantify confidence.
So why is anyone taking the model seriously?
I don't know why they're taking the model seriously. It's very difficult for me to understand. Anybody that's actually looked at any of these models, looked at the differences between the models in terms of their predictions for one region and one time, how you could possibly take the aggregate of these models for the globe and its prediction of what's going to happen 50 years from now very seriously.
There are people around, there are a lot of scientists around, not only members of the public, who are saying, as if it's absolutely categorically the case, that if you increase CO2 in the atmosphere, you get heating.
Yeah, I'm saying that that's not at all evident.
CO2 is not the only greenhouse gas, nor the most important. Water vapor is the primary greenhouse gas, along with the other major greenhouse gas, ozone. A number of other trace gases, such as methane, play a minor role. These gases do not simply absorb radiation, they also emit radiation. And like all good absorbers of radiation, they're also good emitters. In fact, they emit as much as they absorb. Furthermore, the way they absorb and emit radiation changes throughout the atmosphere. The radiative process is therefore highly complex, and the effect of any one gas is not the same throughout the atmosphere and is linked to all the other gases.
Additions of CO2 to the atmosphere will certainly cause an increase in the downward flux at the surface of energy, but that will not necessarily change the temperature of the lower layers of the atmosphere. This additional energy coming down from the CO2 at the surface, what I think it will do is it will evaporate more water and put more water into the system. And that will have a lot of ramifications, one of which is the radiative effects, which, as I said before, will tend to produce more cooling by the water vapor, and we can demonstrate that. But in addition, it will produce more cloud, and the cloud will have other effects, such as reflecting more solar radiation. So it's not at all obvious that by increasing the CO2 in the system, that you actually change the temperature in the positive sense. You could actually end up with a lower temperature.
Professor Newell is not alone in this view. In a recent paper on the effects of carbon dioxide, Professor Elzasser at the Lawrence Livermore Labs, a major US government research establishment in California, concluded that a doubling of CO2 would have little or no effect on the temperature at the surface and, if anything, might cause the surface to cool. The complexity of the radiation effects of the greenhouse gases is further confused by convection currents, which carry warm air at the surface to higher altitudes.
If you put greenhouse gases near the surface and the air currents short-circuit that greenhouse gas, it won't contribute to warming. If you put a lot in at the surface and take a little away near the top where the heat is deposited by the convection, that could lead to cooling even though you had a net increase in the amount of greenhouse gas. There is no simple, uniform relation between the total amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere and the temperature at the surface.
At the very least, we simply don't understand enough about the behavior of the atmosphere to predict the effect of a change in CO2 with any certainty.
How is it that we've been led to take talk of catastrophe seriously? After all, it's only some 15 years since a rather different global climate catastrophe was in vogue.
There's the ever-present threat of a big freeze. Will a new ice age claim our lands and bury our northern cities? It's buried Manhattan Island before, when great glaciers half a mile thick filled the valley of New York's Hudson River.
You do accept that sort of 10, 15 years ago, people were talking about a global cooling, not a global warming.
Yeah. People were talking about global cooling 15 years ago, but not everybody. I was one who was not sure.
You say you didn't believe in global cooling, but in your first book you said, I've cited many examples of recent climatic variability and repeated the warnings of several well-known climatologists that a cooling trend has set in, perhaps one akin to the Little Ice Age. Mm-hmm. Well, that was just 14 years ago.
Yeah.
So
I said that because at the time it was true. But you got to be honest. You got to tell things the way they are. I don't mind people quoting what I had to say in the 70s.
But doesn't all of that add up to saying that you're asking governments to spend billions of dollars on a view which is different from one you held a decade ago?
I don't see any problem in saying that people learn. I'm not embarrassed about the view I had a decade ago.
You should remember that when I was going to graduate school, it was gospel that the Ice Age was about to start. And to tell the truth, I had trouble warming up to that one, too. So this is not the first. It is certainly the loudest of the climate apocalypses, but it is not the first.
There may be many reasons why we might want to believe in an apocalypse, but for the scientists involved, some of them are very straightforward.
It's easier to get funding if you can show some evidence for impending climate disasters. In the late 1970s, of course, it was the coming ice age, and now it's the coming global warming. Who knows what it'll be 10 years from now. But sure, science benefits from some scary scenarios.
A lot of people are getting very famous and very well known and very well funded as a result of promoting the disastrous scenario of greenhouse warming.
My suspicion would be that if one has a crisis like this, it's easier to gain funds for the profession as a whole.
Prior to Bush the Elder, I think the level of funding for climate and climate-related sciences was somewhere around the order of $170 million a year, which was reasonable for the size of the field. It jumped to $2 billion a year, more than a factor of 10. And yeah, that changed a lot. I mean,
that's a lot of jobs.
A lot of jobs. It brought a lot of new people into it who otherwise were not interested. So you developed whole cadres of people whose only interest in the field was that there was global warming.
But if you oppose the theory, life can get difficult.
I was warned when I wrote my first paper, which discussed a difference between the climate models and some numbers that I was looking at for the tropics alone, that it would be very difficult and that my funding would probably be cut. And in fact, it has been cut.
Did you believe that at the time?
No, I didn't. I thought that the system was so straightforward and honest that bringing in a new idea and a new perspective into the whole thing, which I thought I did in 1979, would actually be considered to be a positive thing, and that people would like to look at both sides of the argument and then have a debate.
But of course, in some ways, one could say it's been successful in terms of raising funds, that by going around saying there's a crisis around the corner, people are talking about putting in more funds and so forth, and maybe it's worked.
Perhaps it's worked, perhaps I was wrong, but I think that it's going to backfire.
Richard Lindzen has recently said that this whole area of global warming has sort of become a new McCarthyism. And if you don't jump on the environmental bandwagon to stop the inevitable warming that the Earth is going to undergo, that you're going to be ostracized from the scientific community and from everybody else's community, because it's not fashionable to disagree with the environmentalists these days.
I don't know. Neither of us can answer. Of course not. We can't answer that question.
People who have a point of view which may not be the politically acceptable point of view are going to have problems. That's not surprising. I have had experience with editors where I have asked questions as to why something was rejected. And this has occurred with more than one journal, and have been told that your papers are held to a higher standard of review than others. I've been literally told that.
For what grounds did they hold?
Because of what they say. I mean, that's fine, okay, if they want to be that way. I'm a big boy. I've been fairly successful. I know that I would have been more successful probably if I'd say the world's coming to an end, but I just can't quite bring myself to do that.
Of course, it's not only been the scientists. The media also benefits from a good disaster story.
Storms, cyclones, drought, high winds and floods. A foretaste of global warming, a change in the climate caused by man's pollution of the planet.
The climate is okay does not usually make the headlines. And the best prophets of doom are the ones filmed most.
The rate of change is so fast that I don't hesitate to call that kind of change potentially catastrophic for ecosystems. Well, of course you always tell the truth, but how many of us ever get on the evening news in more than 23 seconds? Can you give the whole story in 23 seconds? You have to selectively give bits of information.
And if the scientists and the media have connived to make a good story, the politicians have not been slow to see the advantages to them.
There are statements made of such overt unrealism that I feel embarrassed. I feel it discredits my science. And I think there could arise problems where one will need to depend on scientific judgment. And by ruining our credibility now, we leave society with a diminished resource of some importance.
Why do you think it is that politicians, and indeed Congress, have been convinced that there has been global warming?
I don't know that they've been convinced, but their business is to be responsive to their constituents, and their constituents are convinced. It would certainly not be in their best political interest to not act convinced, would it? So the people want to believe this, and politicians have to respond somewhat to the people's wants. They can't say to their constituents, "You are stupid," can they?
It may not quite add up to a conspiracy, but certainly a coalition of interests has promoted the greenhouse theory. Scientists have needed funds, the media a story, and governments a worthy cause.
And to build the number up to 2,500, they have to start taking reviewers and government people and so on, anyone who ever came close to them. And none of them are asked to agree. Many of them disagree.
Those people who are specialists but don't agree with the polemic and resign, and there have been a number that I know of, they are simply put on the author list and become part of this 2,500 of the world's top scientists.
Joined now by Chris Horner. He is the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming. Chris, I want to start here. People that are on the special or that speak out are always going to be accused of taking money from big oil. How do you respond to that? You're in bed with big oil, they say.
That's generally employed by people who aren't comfortable with the issues or the facts and they want to change the subject. If industry funding corrupts someone's message, however, I suggest the alarmists have an awful lot of explaining to do. They receive an awful lot more in industry and industry-related funding every year, but let's just make the record, the public record is quite clear. We do not receive lots of money from big oil, and for some reason that seems to be the claim that the alarmists want to shift the debate onto, even though they know the truth there too.
So are you saying that the reason why this is such a big deal is because of money? How much money do we spend on research on climate change and global warming compared to, let's say, cancer?
I believe slightly more. Let's just say the same amount on both climate-related activities and the amount we send to the National Cancer Institutes every year, which I think is rather shameful. The administration has done quite a bit right on this issue, but to their discredit, they boast that they spend so much more on global warming issues than they do AIDS. I think that's disgraceful. This is a political issue because it's been politicized, and we wouldn't even be talking about it right now if it weren't for the politicians.
Okay. In the Al Gore movie, he keeps talking about all of these scientists, and there's nothing but consensus, and discredit everybody else that does. How does the IPCC even work? This is the group of thousands of scientists that write this report.
Right, except thousands of people obviously can't write a report. Just think of the practical impracticalities there. It doesn't happen that way. Here's what happens. They don't conduct science. They review the existing literature. And the thousands of scientists select or emphasize what it is they want to. We've seen this, sometimes disgracefully. However, these scientists are generally assigned 1 page to a page and a half to write with one other author. They're never asked if they agree with anything else, never asked if they agree with the chapter, the underlying work, let alone the summary for policymakers, which is written by bureaucrats and politicians and pressure group lobbyists who are in one room down a hall where the lead authors of the chapters, which are compilations of these page to page and a half writings, and a runner runs back and forth telling the lead authors, the scientists, the pressure group lobbyists want you to change the following to be in harmony with the summary. Remember, this is a document that is produced generally, the summary of which is issued months before the actual underlying work is actually even written. That should tell you something. And this writing process whereby runners subject, very credentialed scientists, many of whom have dropped off, to the humiliation of having to change their underlying work to agree with something politicians want to say, which, like I say, is why many of these so-called world's leading scientists do remain in the process, but many also have dropped off.
Chris, one thing that somebody could Google right now, and you watched the movie and you said, oh, geez, I wish people would just Google this fact. In the movie, Inconvenient Truth, what would be the one fact they should Google?
Well, the cause and effect relationship of CO2 and temperatures. Obviously, temperatures go up throughout history. The scientific literature is fairly clear, fairly uniform. Temperatures go up, then CO2 concentrations go up. CO2 does not drive temperature.
Great. Chris Horner, thanks.
We're all competing for funds. And if your field is the focus of concern, you have that much less work rationalizing why your field should be funded.
Meanwhile, in Oregon, the state climatologist George Taylor is under fire for his take on global warming.
Most of the climate change we've seen up until now has been as a result of natural variations.
Solely because of this opinion, Governor Ted Kolongoski
wants Taylor to be stripped of his title.
I just think that there has to be somebody that says that this is the state position on this.
We reached out to Taylor. He said only this: being skeptical about the effects of human-caused greenhouse gases on global climate variations can threaten one's long-term job security. He's choosing his words very carefully. These days, it seems you have to.
Scientists, accustomed to the relative civility and obscurity of academic life, suddenly find themselves publicly attacked if they dare to challenge the theory of man-made global warming. Vilified by campaign groups and even within their own universities.
It's the old English saying, if you stand up in the coconut shy, they're going to throw at you. So I understand that there's going to be some of that, but it gets pretty difficult and pretty nasty and very personal. And there have been, you know, death threats and all sorts of things. And so I'm not doing it for my health.
There's one thing you shouldn't say, and that is, this might not be a problem.